Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, there are thousands of different ways to build or variations of builds within Elden Ring, and Shadow of the Erdtree as a DLC has just added in even more. One of the most prominent, easy, and brokenly powerful builds in the base game was a combination of the Cerulean Hidden Tier Wondrous Flask upgrade, which gave you infinite FP for a limited time, and Comet Azure, a spell which normally is only limited by the size of your FP bar. These two things put together created a laser build that pretty much killed any boss in a singular input that didn't, dodge it in seconds. And I genuinely believe this build is responsible for the way that every boss starts a fight in the DLC by either launching ranged attacks or gap closing in about half a second from their starting position, or just constantly dodging whatever you do. None of them just sort of menacingly walk towards you anymore, which was a relatively common interaction in the base game. That said, a new companion to this Wondrous Flask upgrade was added in the DLC, the Viridian Hidden Tier. To be specific, what this does is give you a 15-second window after drinking your flask where you have infinite stamina, a pretty exact equivalent. So today we'll talk about the various use cases of this tier, what it can do, what it can't, as well as a massive bug that makes it broken in the most literal of ways, and will probably change your opinion on it very quickly. First things first then, this comes from killing the Furnace Golem at the entrance to the Cerulean Coast region, and I recommend instead actually killing this one from above by doing so in the Red Flower region from the Charo's Hidden Grave Site of Grace, just along the cliffline here where I am. You can see it right below you. Lob a few hefty fire or furnace pots into the basket of its head at the right angle, and it'll die in a fraction of the time that it would if you just beat on its leg for ages. That said, once you actually have the tier, let's talk about what it can and can't do, and I'll start right out of the gate with what I imagine is most people's initial thought with this. What about shields? What about guard poking? And what about thrusting shields, which can both block and do guard pokes in a singular weapon? Well, this is where it gets a little bit awkward, because despite Viridian Hidden Tier specifically saying it eliminates all stamina use, this doesn't apply to blocking at all. It will negate the stamina use from the weapon pokes that you do behind the shield, the actual guard pokes, but it won't remove the stamina loss from the guarding itself, which is like the most important part of it while you're using a shield. This removes one of possibly the main usages of this, which is just let you go in with the shield in your offhand and try to zerg a boss down with guard pokes during the duration of the flask. But this just doesn't literally work to begin with, even if the flask duration was longer, because it just doesn't stop block stamina damage. That said, there are a lot of things at least that have some level of effect with this, and I'll generally be talking about this in a descending order from my testing, meaning we will start with the most effective uses and sort of work our way down. At the top of the list then is infinite weapon skills in combination with Iron Jar. This includes anything like the new Putrescent Cleaver unique skill, the Rakshasa Sword unique skill, or the Dancer's Sword unique skill, and from the base game it means things like Prelate's Charge as well as an Ash of War can actually get an extra 15 seconds of Doom Train like that before you'd have to stop your charge, and these actually can get a lot of use out of this flask upgrade, specifically if you build around having them be sort of rush kill builds. Basically, whether or not it's worth using in these setups depends on whether this extra 15 seconds of stamina is enough to get you the boss kill before you have to do a reset of any kind. And especially if you're doing things with Iron Jar, that actually sort of has a lot of synergy, because you get 15 seconds of free stamina, and then the rest of your Iron Jar you'll be working off your actual stamina bar, but this is much longer than if you were just using your natural stamina bar. If it does get the kill on this timer, it's definitely worth it. If it's not enough though, then you probably almost definitely honestly get higher value from just a different flask upgrade. As the thing to consider here is, even if it provides some value, there are a lot of really good Wondrous Flask tiers to choose from. As well, I regret to inform you that the Flamethrower Shield doesn't work with this, despite being a skill that is 90% based on its stamina use and potentially infinite, because blocking still uses stamina. So you just can't hold the skill for the duration, because things will still hit you, and that's just sort of really sad to me, honestly. I was really hopeful for that one. The other one I would say is on the same value tier as the infinite skills that aren't the Flamethrower though, is specifically blindspot. Blindspot is a really strong new Ash of War for backhand blades that just has a ton of iframes at the start of the animation that then follows with a strong attack. Then it has a ton of recovery frames. These recovery frames can be cancelled by using blindspot again, but you don't regenerate stamina during the recovery. This means if the skill uses the last of your stamina, there is a relatively long delay before you can actually use the skill again. This makes it uniquely good for infinite stamina. It doesn't remove all thought from the skill, as you can still be poise broken after the iframes, but it does let you spam it pretty healthily with a little bit of decent timing during the 15-second duration. But again, It's a 15-second duration, so it depends on if your damage is enough, and if that lets you kill the boss in a reasonable amount of time. Moving on to the next tier down then, we have any weapon skill that uses a lot of stamina and has follow-up inputs involved. The reason for this being, while singular use weapon skills have a brief moment to regenerate stamina in between every use, just because of the way that stamina recovery works, with those skills you gain just a small amount, especially with such a short duration on the actual flask, that just doesn't make any sense to use. You basically have a difference of frames over the whole duration. With multiple input skills, however, you don't regenerate stamina during the combo, and so if you run out in the middle, you cannot do all of the inputs of the skill, and usually the later inputs of these skills are the stronger ones, so having infinite stamina makes you able to spam them harder. And this also works best with the ones that also just have high poise on them to begin with. Things like the Ancient Meteoric Greatswords White Lightning skill, Savage Lion's Claw, or warning for final boss weapon spoiler, which I will be showing on the screen in 3, 2, 1, the Greatsword of Radahn, Lord Edition with the multi-hit Holy Beam sword swing combo. This has decent poise and uses an absolute ton of stamina, so this flask upgrade actually lets you spam it out a little bit more than you otherwise could, but it still is limited mostly again just because of the 15-second duration. One other example within this category is the new Blink Bolt Death Knight skills, either the twin axes or the long haft axe, and this also has some iframes on it too, so while not quite as good as blindspot, it falls more into the second category here of it's not bad with the flask upgrade, but not great either. Past that, there is only one other real main use case, which is the repeating crossbow. This is new in the DLC, and this weapon skill fires a ton of bolts in quick succession. Normally, this basically just uses your entire stamina bar to actually use the skill, but this flask upgrade makes it consume nothing, of course, which lets you fire off like 4 or 5 volleys right in a row over the duration of the flask if you have the right positioning to do so. And there are niche uses for this, like applying a status within the duration using only crossbow bolts before switching to another weapon. Things like Scarlet Rot, for example, as a good option, but this uses a ton of arrows to do, and it again is just such a very, very niche scenario in the first place, and is just quite arguably not worth a wondrous flask slot. Finally, there are spells, all types of magic, sorcery, and incantations, and to put it simply, any spell that isn't infinite will generally cost so little stamina compared to the FP that it costs, that you either can spam it well enough with natural stamina regen in between your casts, or that you would just get better use out of the cerulean hidden tier than the Viridian one. Even with permacast spells, you just gain so much less comparatively than you do for infinite FP, and that comes down to the real crux of the whole thing, the end result of all of this testing, the part where I tell you whether the tier is good or not and why. The answer? No, it just sort of isn't in its current state. It has some very niche scenarios where it might make already stupidly powerful builds potentially able to just get slightly faster kills. But what then happens is that's usually replacing something of nearly equivalent value anyways, and something that would definitely last longer for 15 seconds and give you more margin for error. If this applied to blocking, for example, I could see it literally having a use in builds that can use shields to kill bosses within the duration, but again, not only does it just brokenly not actually do what it says it does when you're holding a shield, but it also still only lasts for 15 seconds, and regardless of anything else at all, that is the main problem, the duration. The effect of infinite stamina is definitely a good thing, but they balance this sort of in proportion to the cerulean hidden tier, the infinite FP option. The infinite FP tier lasts for 10 seconds, which is enough to genuinely turn a lot of bosses to dust with the right combos with that tier. It full-on unlocks playstyles that you just otherwise couldn't use, and because it is usually combined with magic, it was only one part of an otherwise coherent build, as you could then just switch spells off of those to whatever you needed after it ends. With stamina, this lasts for 15 seconds, which granted is longer than 10, but stamina is just so much less valuable a commodity than FP is in this game. FP is a limited resource to begin with every life that you live, and there are lots of things in the game that are built to scale insanely with a high FP cost as a result of that fact. Stamina, however, regenerates constantly. The game knows this. The second any recovery frame ends, you get stamina back, and you can do pretty much anything that costs stamina, no matter the amount that you have, as long as you have even a sliver of green in your bar. This means the vast majority of interactions with this tier are just sort of pointless. It shaves frames off of animations for the vast majority of things, and doing so for just far too short a time for those frames to add up to anything meaningful. This tier would be balanced and fun, in my opinion, if it was probably around 45 seconds of duration. It doesn't need to be a minute. 30 seconds might even do it if you only count putting it in perfect builds for it, but 45 seconds seems like a really good number to me. All I know for sure is 15 seconds is just sort of pitiful and makes it barely feel even worth using, and even then, only in super niche scenarios. All in all, I think this testing was important to actually find these results, and I'm happy that I'm able to share them with you, but I do wish that I had cooler findings or happier results to actually share. I wish I could say this is broken and mean that because it makes new builds possible that destroy bosses and are fun to play, but the truth is that it is only broken in the sense that it isn't working as it should, and even if it was, I don't think it would be enough unless they gave it a buff. I hope you've enjoyed this regardless though, and let us know down in the comments if there's anything else that you'd like to see tested too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.